This is the reverting story of 23-year-old girl named as Cassie, which was a nurse at that time. She told us about his reverting story, which all my Muslim brothers and sisters should know as well. An English guy with early onset Alzheimer's who was my patient. The patient's record was handed to me during the initial consultation, and I was able to determine that he was a Muslim because he had converted to the Islamic faith. As a result, I tried to modify my care to accommodate his needs, knowing that I would need to consider some therapy modalities that would conflict with his religious beliefs. Many of my coworkers did not understand why I was exerting so much effort for my patient because he was in a very advanced stage of his ailment, but I realized that even if someone is unable to understand, their dedication to a certain faith ought to be respected. Anyway, after working with my patient for a few weeks, I started to detect some movement patterns. I initially assumed that he was copying certain actions from someone else, but I later noticed that he repeated the motion at specific times throughout the day: morning, noon, and night. He made the gestures of raising his hands, bowing, and finally lowering his head to the ground. I was unable to comprehend it. He was also repeating phrases in a different language. I couldn't tell what language it was because of the slur in his voice, but I do know that the same poems were repeated every day. Another oddity was that he wouldn't let me feed him with my left hand as I am left-handed. I wasn't sure how, but I sensed that this had something to do with his religion. Talk is a platform for conversations and debates, and one of my coworkers informed me about it. Since I didn't know any Muslims outside my patient, I thought it would be beneficial to chat with someone directly and ask questions. I went to the Islam page and went into the True Message room. I inquired about the repetitive motions and was informed that they were acts of prayer. Before someone shared a link to the Islamic prayer on YouTube, I didn't truly believe it. I felt stunned. A man who was scarcely able to eat and drink and had lost all memory of his children and job was able to recall not only the actions of prayer but also verses from a different language. The fact that this man was a devoted follower of his religion and that this was nothing short of incredible motivated me to study more about it so that I could provide the best possible treatment for him. I frequently visited the Talk area where I received the link to read and listen to the Quran's translation. I read the B chapter aloud multiple times a day since it gave me the goosebumps. My patient was crying and laughing when I played him a recording of the Quran from my iPod. After reading the translation, I understood why. I used what I learned from Talk to take care of my patient, but over time, I noticed that I kept returning to the room to look for solutions for myself. My mother passed away when I was 3 years old, and my brother and I were raised by our grandparents, who passed away 4 years ago. I never really stopped to think about my life. Now there are just the two of us. But despite all of my losses, I always believed that I was pleased and contented. Only after spending time with my patient did I begin to feel as though something was missing. I was missing the calmness and peace that my patient had despite her suffering. Even though he had no one nearby, I wanted what he felt: a sense of belonging and being a part of something. I went down to visit a mosque after receiving a list of them from a woman on Talk. While I was watching the prayer, I was unable to control my tears. The imam and his wife would give me books and recordings and were open to answering any questions I had. I felt drawn to the mosque every day. I asked questions at the mosque and on Talk, and every response I received was so comprehensive and illuminating that I had no choice but to embrace it. I've never been religious, but I've always known there is a God. I just didn't know how to worship him. When I logged on to Talk one evening, one of the other users on the mic addressed me. I declined his request to ask me any questions. I responded in the affirmative when he asked if I was satisfied with the responses. I was unable to respond when he asked what was keeping me from accepting Islam. I visited the mosque to observe the early morning prayer. I was questioned by the imam and was unable to respond. The only thing preventing me from accepting him was fear. Not fear of something evil, but fear of receiving something wonderful and believing that I was not worthy like this man. I then went to tend to my patient. As I was feeding him, I suddenly realized that he had been given to me for a reason. I went to the mosque that afternoon and asked the imam if I might recite my Shahada. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. There is no other God. He supported me and gave me direction on what I should do next. The emotion I experienced while saying that is indescribable. It seemed as though someone had roused me from sleep so that I could see things more clearly. Overwhelming happiness, clarity, and tranquility were the predominant emotions. My patient was the first person I told, not my brother. When I approached him, he was already crying and grinning at me before I could say anything. I sobbed in his presence because I owed him so much. When I got home, I logged onto Paltalk and recited the room's Shahada. Despite the fact that I had never met a single one of them, they all supported me so much and felt more like family to me than my own brother. Even though he wasn't happy, my brother backed me and promised to be there when I finally called to inform him. I couldn't have asked for more. My patient died in his sleep while I was tending for him after my first week as a Muslim. I was the only person with him as he passed away peacefully. He served as my gateway to Islam and was like the father I never had. I shall pray that Allah has mercy on him and rewards every good deed I do for him tenfold from the day of my Shahada to this present day and every day for as long as I live. I prayed every night to become an atom's weight of the Muslim he was because I loved him for Allah's sake.